Hello everybody and welcome back. This is part 6 of our Trumpeter 1200 scale HMS hood build. In this video we'll be looking at completing the work below the shelter deck, and if there's time I might also prepare the shelter deck part for the Pontos parts as well. But the main thing is to get the work done underneath the shelter deck. This area is part of the forecastle deck. And it actually is known as the side batteries. It was a position for the original secondary armament, or some of the original secondary armament on HMS Hood, but that was removed and replaced with the 4-inch secondary armament a bit later on. So it was bare of armament, but it's got quite a bit of detail in it, this area. It's got hatches, some ammunition boxes, various reels and stuff that need to be fitted in this space, and we'll also be fitting the first of the Pontos decks in this area as well, so we'll come on to that in a moment. The first thing we need to do is prepare the detail parts that we're going to need for this area, and what I've done is I've just worked through page 2 of the Pontos instructions, where this space, this midship part of the forecastle deck appears, and it details all the various parts that need to be made up from the Pontos etched parts, and there's a mixture of hatches, skylights and so on, as I said, and I've compared that with the Trumpeter instructions, and we're looking at pages 8 and 9 here, and it's sections 6 and 7 of the build process. And what I'll do is I'll bring the camera in and just show you what I've done to marry the Pontos instructions with the Trumpeter ones. So we'll just take a look at that, and then we'll get over to the bench and start making up some of the etched brass parts from the Pontos set. This is the section of the Pontos instructions that we're interested in on page 2. So this shows the area of the forecastle deck beneath the shelter deck, and this is the position of the deck houses in this position. We can see that there are a number of parts here which are etched parts from the Pontos set. There are a variety of hatches and ammunition boxes and so on with their part numbers, and their assembly appears in this section here. We'll locate the etched brass parts that we need and begin to assemble them a bit later on in this video, but first of all we just need to gather together all the Trumpeter parts that we're going to need. So there's a few parts from the Trumpeter kit that we're going to need for this stage of the assembly, and that starts with these 6 deck houses here. These are the Trumpeter parts that we're going to need from this section. So we have the 6 deck house sections that we need, and they're going to need a little bit of modification, not too much. They have some armoured doors that need removing. We're going to sand down the righoles here on the portholes, which we're going to replace with the etched brass ones as we did on the hull side. Some doors on that one as well, but generally not too much to prepare on those parts. Just moving over to section 7, and here Trumpeter detail a number of parts that we're not going to need. So these hatches here, or ammunition boxes, I'm not sure what they're meant to be in the Trumpeter kit, but they're all replaced with etched brass ones from Pontos. There are a couple of vents here and here that we need from the Trumpeter kit, so that's these parts here. So I'll prepare those. There are these tubular pieces here which are actually the undersides of 2 of the 4-inch mountings on the shelter deck. The other 2 are actually integral with the deck houses here. So those are the parts that we're going to need, not too many from the Trumpeter kit. The rest is all going to be etched brass work. I'm going to start off with the smaller of the parts here, and really it's just a case of cleaning up the sprue attachment gates on these. So just a quick file to get rid of those attachment gates. I'm just using a 400 thinner stick for these parts to start with, and then moving on to, I think this is probably an 800, it's quite a bit smoother, just to get some of the scratch marks out. And then finally I just go in with a buffer, both sides of a buffer, just to polish them back up again. And that's ready to go. So I'm going to do that with all of these parts, same process, and get them ready. I'm just going to sand off the doors on these parts. The Trumpeter parts are all cleaned up now, so I've been all the way around, removed all the doors, the wriggles from above the portholes there, all those to be replaced with Pontos etched brass. So they're all nice and smooth. When we're looking to reinstate the doors and so on, I'm just going to make reference to the anatomy of the ship book, and it's this diagram here, A318, shows the forecastle deck amidships with these two pieces of structure here, and the doors are all marked on the drawing here. So rather than just replace the Trumpeter mouldings with the etched brass doors and other fitments, I'm going to be referring to this diagram here to get absolutely the correct position for the replacement doors. Moving on to the etched parts that we need for this section now, and we'll start with this armour box G. We need 16 of those, and they're part numbers 445 and 750. So I'm just going to go over to the schedule that I made out and find 445. So armour box G, it's on fret 5 and 6, so those are the funnel frets, which are very similar, apart from obviously the size of the funnel foils. So I'll use one of the 5s, and we need a 750 as well, according to the instructions. So 750, the armour box stand is on fret 11. So that's 11. So we've got the parts that we need on those frets. So we can get rid of the schedule for a minute. And we need 16 of each. So it's these parts here, and there are 13 on a fret, so we're going to need 2 frets to make up the number. I have 2 fret 5s because it contains the larger funnel foil here that we need to do the funnel modification later on. But these boxes also appear on fret 6, which is the smaller funnel fret. But I'll use these two to start with. Starting off with the armour box type G then. So this is the main element of the box, and the box fits on a little stand there, which we'll come on to in a moment. First of all, we just need to bend the armour box up, and I'm going to bend the long side first and leave the 2 end flaps until later. See the detail on those with the ends of the shells in. I'm not going to use the folding tool for this. I've got some Tamiya bending pliers. These are really good for bending etch brass because they're nice and flat. They're not going to damage the part in any way, and they taper towards the nose, so they're able to get into lots of tight spaces, and they also taper into a triangle shape at the end, so it's possible to bend the part just over 90 degrees, and that allows for a tiny bit of spring back on the from the brass. So they're really good tools. So I'm just going to use those to fold the parts along. And I'm looking for 90 degrees at this point. Just judging that by eye. So you can see how the tool just allows you to go slightly past the 90 and the part springs back to 90 degrees. Do the last one now. Just go back and get it nice and square. So I've got a nice square box there, and we're not going to do anything with the flaps, the end flaps, just at the moment, because I just want to seal this box up. Some thin super glue here on a stick, and I'm just going to flood the inside joint there, and I'm just going to leave that to set up. So we'll come onto the base now, and I'm going to use the etched folding tool for this because these strips down here are so thin that it's very difficult to bend them without twisting the join there. So the tool will just hold them nice and tight while I make the bend. So we'll start off by doing the two narrow sides. That's the first bend. These are very fragile parts, so we don't want to mess about with them and do too much with them, otherwise they will snap. So a nice flat blade there, and I'll burnish it down with the edge of the knife handle. So that's the two ends done. Most of these boxes sit on the deck with the narrow end facing out towards the viewer, so that's the bend that I'm concentrating on most, getting nice and square. I'm trying with all of them, but at least if I've got the nice square edge on the visible face, that'll be okay. So we're going to come and do the other two sides now. Now I can't use this edge of the tool anymore because obviously we've made a 90 degree bend already. So I'm going to have to go to one of these fingers here to do the other bends. So we just feed it into the fingers there, and I want that really tightened down to make sure that the part stays where I want it. Slide a blade underneath and fold up, and again I'm going to go slightly over the 90 and just bend the first legs that I did inwards so they all close up, and over to the other side. I think it'd be very difficult to do these parts without a tool like this, at least to get them neat. So if you don't have one and you're trying this work, it's probably worth investing. Just go back in with the Tamiya pliers there just to smarten that edge up. And that's the stand done. So we'll finish off the box and get that mounted. Coming back to the box now, and I just want to fold the end flaps up. So we'll just move them somewhere towards and start to close them up. I'm not going to do that fully. I just want to get some super glue in there. Just coat the faces with super glue, and I'm going to use a clamp just to close them up and leave that for 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure that it sets up properly before I do anything else with it. So that's the box dry, and I just need to mount it onto the stand now. It does go one way. There's a plain piece at the bottom which is the base, and I'll glue the stand to the base. If I just drop the stand onto it, I'll be able to make sure that it's nice and squared up. So that's one of the armour boxes on its stand. So we'll do the same. We need 16 of those, so I'll just repeat the process and get those finished. So we're going to move on to the armour box F now, which is these parts. So that's just a simple box to fold up. So we'll do that with the bending pliers. We have the parts here for the F-type hatch, and we need 5 of those. So that's another box to fold up with a lid and some of the hinges to fold down as well. So we'll get those done. So we need to fold this up into a box. You can see the hinge detail on the outside, so we obviously need to fold in the correct direction. So that's the box set up. I just want to fold the ends in now and get them tacked into place. And I am going to clamp those with some spring tweezers just until the super glue has a chance to dry. So here's the lid for these hatches, which we can position simply in a closed state like that. But what's interesting is the part has detail on the inside as well, so I'm assuming that's so that you can pose the lids of one or more of these hatches in an open position. But I'm going to close all mine. So I just want to start by folding those hinges down at the back. So I just want to line the hinges up at the back there. And once that's dry, we just have some what appear to be clamps or screw downs that will need to be folded up, so we'll come back and do that in a moment. So I just want to come back in now and fold the tie downs, or hold down brackets, whatever they're called. Now we need 2 hatch G's, and just as a note, Pontos don't identify them in the same way as the other hatches. They simply have the 2 numbers 1131 and 1133 for these 2 hatches here. I've just called them hatch G as a follow-on to the remainder. I'm not sure why Pontos didn't identify them in the same way, A, B, C, D, E, F and so on, as they have with the other parts, but there we are. So we need 1131 and 1133 for these 2 hatches. So here are the bases. They've got a very shallow side to them, so again I'm going to use the bending tool just to get those started. So that's a nice sharp bend on that part. So I'll do the other one. So there we have the 2 bases. I'll go on to do the tops now. So bend the hinges down at the back and the locking screws up. So I can glue those hatch lids onto the bases now. Just a dab of super glue. That's all that we need on these. And unlike the other parts, these are not handed, so they can go on either way. Just make sure that they're nice and central. Moving on now to these 6 reels that I need, and this is quite a confusing situation because the numbering of the parts are all wrong in the Pontos instructions. This section of the Pontos instructions, it's page 18, details the 6 types of reels that are required across the model, and we're needing reel 6, which is the smaller, looks like the wall mounted reels here. And there are 18 available in the Pontos set, so we need 6 for this particular part of the assembly, but they are repeated elsewhere on the ship, so there's a couple on the back screens, for example, and other parts of the superstructure. So we need 18, and it tells us here the etched brass parts for the frame is number 878, and the 2 end pieces are 877. That's fine, we've located those here. When we come to the brass reels that we need here, reel 6, we're looking for brass parts 54A and 05B. And when we come to look at the parts, 05 is actually 16, mainly gun barrels for the Vickers mounts, but they also have a reel attached to them as well, so we need to just clip those off. The other 2 that we need for the full complement of 18 is over here on parts 54, so we'll take those 2 and we'll take 4 from the Vickers part number 05. So that'll give us the 6 that we need for the minute. The confusing thing is when we look at the turned brass schedule in the Pontos instructions, you could be thrown off track here because 05, which is the part that we want, is listed as reel 1 and we're after reel 6. And the other place to find them is here, part 54, which is a large reel and the 2 reels that we need for the ones that we're making up now, but they're identified as reel 2. Sorry, they're identified as reel 1 on this section. So this whole part of the instruction manual thinks that this reel is reel 1. So we're going to press on and assume that we're correct with these parts. They look right, and I think once we compare them with the frame, clearly there will only be those that fit into the frames that we need. So we'll get the etched brass cut out and then we'll sort out all these brass reels. So having deciphered the Pontos instructions, I've sorted the parts out that we need. So we have the 6 brass reels, 6 frames that will need folding, and we have 12 reel ends here. So these should be fairly simple to put together. I'll start off with just adding the ends onto the reels. And it's just a case of bending these up through more or less 90 degrees just so we can fit the reel inside, and then we'll just pinch them together. So that should be enough, I think. Quite a bit tricky than I expected, actually. So we'll do the other 5. Moving on to the deck houses now, and I've been through the plan here in the Anatomy of the Ship book, which shows the forecastle deck and the positions of the various portholes and doors which run alongside these parts. And I've just made a comparison between the drawing and the trumpeter parts and just marked up any corrections that need to be made. I've taken the doors off already and I've marked the positions of the doors here where they need to be fitted. I've checked the porthole positions and ticked them off where Pontos have got them in the right place, or more or less in the right place. The engine room vents here are in the correct position, so they're a good reference for the positions of the portholes and doors along these walls. So they're marked here. There are some new portholes to be drilled out where they've been missed, so the P's here. There are also 5, I think, that need to be filled in, so these 2 didn't exist. They'll just get filled in with some milliput. And I've done the same with the forward deck house. I'm going to fill these slots here, which are for the hose reels in the trumpeter kit, but the new ones need to be fitting on a flush surface, so I'll fill those recesses. and the rest is really just doors. The single porthole, or the pair of portholes here are correct. The doors were marked in the wrong position on the Trumpeter kit, so I'll just get those in the right position now using the drawing as a reference. On the outside of the ship, so these rear deck houses here, just in advance of the rear screens, there's just one porthole to drill in this position here on the port one, and the remainder of the work is just fitting the replacement doors on those. I am going to take out a slot on the external face of these parts because at a later stage these etched brass walls are fitted to the outside of the ship, and I want to be able to see through the portholes into blackness, so I'm going to have to cut out a slot there to allow that to happen. So those parts fit on the outside of the shelter deck moulding at a later stage. These are the replacement doors from Pontos, and there is a slight issue with them in the sense that they're handed. All the locking mechanisms need to face in the same direction, but the hinges are all on the left hand side of the door, whereas some of them were hinged to the right on the actual ship. And that's a minor detail that we're just going to have to live with, I think. Can press on now and start to fit the etched brass parts to these deck houses, and then we can do some painting. So we'll just come on to fitting the doors on these parts. There's one already in there, and I'm just going to fit the other one on this side, and I've made a little jig to fit the doors. It's just a piece of angle at the bottom which slots along the bottom of the part like so. What the jig helps me do is position the doors at the same height all the way along the wall, and this piece here also just gives me an indication of the vertical, just to make sure that these doors are placed on the part nice and square. So I'm using a bit of thick super glue here, just gives you that fraction of a second extra to position the part. So that just drops in like so into the jig, and the vertical guide just helps me position the part correctly. So we have the two doors, same height and vertical. So just have a quick look at all the parts as they were completed, and you'll be able to freeze these if you wanted to follow the build yourself and try and replicate them. Just freeze the photographs at the point that you want. So those are all the parts in the row, and they've just had a quick coat of Tamiya's extra fine primer or fine primer, and just to check for any flaws and so on, and they're all good, so they're ready to go. And the detail parts have also had a coat of primer too. I'm just going to finish up these deck structures now, and all the parts have had a coat of the grey that we've finished the ship in, and I'm now just going to do a few more details on here. So the first thing is to drop some, we have some crystal clear which I'm just going to drop into the portholes, just so we get a bit of gleam out of those, and that's all that's needed. And when that dries, it will create a shiny film as though it's glazed. Try and get a better shot of doing one. So when they dry, they will be transparent. The last job is just to highlight the engine room vents with some Tamiya accent colour. This is the black one. So I'm just very carefully going to work some of that into these vents here, to the engine room vents on these walls. Just be careful not to get any on the surrounding paintwork. When these pieces are fitted and the shelter deck's on top of them, it's very difficult to see anything in this area. So this blackness will just help to suggest that there is something there. Otherwise they'd just be lost in the depth of the hull. And when that dries, it will lighten up a bit. It's not just going to be a black box on the side. You can see the grille detail in there. So just take a look at the finished parts now before they go onto the model. The engine room vents have been filled in with the Tamiya panel line accent colour, and I've touched in the hose reels with some Citadel layer paint. This one's called a Shtabi Bone. I really like painting with Citadel colours. They go on quite nicely. These were quite well thinned so that they ran into the detail. So it was a bit like a light wash really on the hose reels, and it just shows them up a little bit better. I'm not sure that they were actually that colour or whether they were white or some sort of grey, but I assume that there'd be some sort of canvas hose or something like that, so I've painted them in that canvas colour. So they're ready to go on the model now. They're all done. And the one at the back that we've done the portholes in. So again, the engine room vents have been filled in, and we've got the portholes. I don't know, you can just see there the front ones now glazed. You might just get some reflection back when you're looking into the depths of the side batteries. So I'm happy with those. They can now go on the hull. So just come on to fit the first of the wooden decks now. To start with, I've just given the area that this deck's going to stick to a coat of gloss varnish and acrylic gloss, and that's just removed any bits of dust and make sure that I've got a nice smooth clean surface to stick the deck down onto. Obviously we've cleaned all the bits that we don't need from the deck at an earlier stage, so we're ready to go with this. It's always a bit nerve-wracking to try and work out where this part goes exactly, because once this sticks down I'm not going to be able to remove it easily without damaging it, so I want to get it right. And I'm going to use the deck houses that we've built as a guide. On a dry run I had some difficulty getting the deck over the deck houses when they were in place. So I'm going to leave them loose for the moment and use them just as a reference to get the deck stuck down okay. So I can't put it off any longer. Okay, so I think we're all ready. Let's give that a go. So obviously the underside of the wooden deck has a protective film which we need to carefully peel away. So I'm going to start at the back and just get it lifted. And I'll be careful not to touch this with my fingers. I don't want to be getting any grease or dirt, or remove the adhesive from it. Gosh, these are sticky. Okay. So I've just put the backing paper, half of it, back on the port side, and that just gives me a little bit of safety so that I don't have the thing grabbing all over the place. I think we're good there. And I'm then going to use this just to make sure that it goes down tight up. So we're good at the front. Okay. I think we're okay on that side. So I'm just going to take the backing off the port side now. These are incredibly thin decks. So that's a good result. So I'll just work around now and make sure that this is properly stuck down, especially at the edges. So working all the way around the edges. That's all good. Right. So now I'll get these parts fitted, and we'll start off with this large piece here. Just going to get some big clamps on that. Just to hold it down at the back. They've gone on really well, so I'm just going to hold them down I'm just going to hold them down for a while just to make sure that they're set up properly. And while that's setting up, we can go on to sorting out all the detail parts, all the boxes and so on that we need to be fitting next. I can start working on fitting the boxes and hatches now, and I'm going to start from the front of the ship and work backwards. So I've got two of the F-type hatches to fit first of all. I had a lucky escape with these boxes, or at least one of them. Last night when I'd finished work in the shed, I went back into the house and I was just washing my hands when I noticed something drop into the basin and down the plug hole. And although I only got a glimpse of it, I thought it was something that from the model. And so I came back into the shed and checked the rack of detail parts that I'd made up, and found that one of these boxes was missing. So I spent half an hour dismantling the waste from the sink to find one of those that was in the trap underneath the sink. So there we are, what we do for the course of modelling. But all's well, we got it back and it's as good as new, so we're okay. And there is a front and back to these, so I just want to make sure I get them in the right place. I'll come in close with the camera and take some detailed close-up photographs of these when I've done all the way along, because it's pretty difficult to get a shot of them. So we have a couple of the armoured boxes next, and because these are on little legs, I don't want to risk getting super glue everywhere all over the deck, so I'm going to use some acrylic hobby glue. This is called Gator Grip, and I'm going to use that for the main reason that it's washable, so if I do make a mistake I'm not going to ruin the deck. So we'll give that one a go. It's pretty strong stuff, is this. You might think for a PVA that it's going to be flexible and it'll bend, but actually it's pretty strong stuff. The other good thing about this glue is it dries transparent, so even if it leaves a slight glossy residue, you can just dab it with a tiny touch of matte varnish just to hide the glue stain. So it's pretty difficult to get the camera in close enough to show what I'm doing here, but basically it's just a case of patiently working around, using the correct sort of glue for whichever application you're using, and working fore to aft so that you're not tripping yourself up over work that you've done before. So I'll carry on, I'll do the rest of this section, and then we'll come back and take some detail photographs so you can see what we've done. So that's all the work done. We'll come in for some photographs. I'll try and get some, although as you can see it's dark, it's been a long day and we need to finish now, but I'll try and get some photographs. If they don't come out very well, I'll wait until tomorrow and take some daylight photographs and just add them as an extra posting later on in the week. but I should be able to get some decent ones. So that's all we set out to do, more or less. I wanted to try and get the shelter deck moulding cleared, but I've not had a chance to do that. This work was very involved and took me a lot longer than I thought it would, but that's usually the case when I build anything, so that's the way it is. So we definitely will come on to clearing the shelter deck in part 7, and I'm not sure we'll be able to fit it because there's some work to do to fit the forecastle deck and the quarter deck. So we probably need to have a look at whether we can do that, but I'll definitely clear the shelter deck and get that prepared. There's an awful lot of work to do to prepare this for the Pontos parts that come later on. So we'll do that. So I'm pretty pleased with the progress that we managed to make this week. This is quite an involved section of the build, and it's come out pretty well. I'm happy with the results of that. So I hope you've picked up 1 or 2 tips along the way in part 6. As I say, we'll be back in part 7 next week. So thanks for joining me for this one, and see you next time. Bye. And just at the end now, we'll do some detailed photographs just to wrap up this video. So this is the work that we've done over the course of the week on the side batteries, and we'll be moving on next time in part 7 to getting the shelter deck work sorted out, as we said in the video. So we'll see you for that next week.